We, the jury, find by a vote of 9-3 that Wade Wilson should be sentenced to death.
He was dubbed the Deadpool Killer for sharing names with Marvel's famous anti-hero. However, compared to what is just fiction, his horrific crimes and reactions to being nabbed by the hands of justice would make your blood boil and make you righteously furious. This is the case of a double murderer and psychopath, Deadpool Killer Wade Wilson. On October 7, 2019, a tragic and horrific event forever changed the lives of many people in Cape Coral, Florida. This was due to the actions of one man, Wade Wilson. A day before, on October 6th, 25-year-old Wade Wilson had gone to the Boot Alive, a bar in Fort Myers, with his girlfriend of 6 months, Melissa Montanez. They drove to the bar in Melissa's car, and when they got into the bar, it was all fun and games until the atmosphere changed. They argued when Wade said he wanted to go to someone's house. Melissa refused and Wade stormed out. Upon getting outside, Melissa saw Wade drive away in her car, leaving her behind. She called her friend, Amy, who came to pick her up. They went to Amy's house, where she spent the night. In the morning, she noticed multiple missed calls from an unfamiliar number and called back only to be met with a furious Wade. He demanded to meet her, and due to Wade's history of substance abuse and violence, she asked to meet in a public spot, which was in front of a business named Mila's Spa. The second indicator that something was wrong was that Wade didn't drive there with Melissa's car. Melissa confronted him, asking where her car was. However, Wade reached out through the window and dragged her by her dress.
Once he realizes that the threads were becoming, I was getting away from him and he was still holding onto the dress.
Melissa was eventually able to break free of Wade's grip after long moments of beating before running into a nearby business where police responded to a domestic violence call. When the officers arrived, she told them Wade was driving a black Nissan Versa, which he used to flee the scene. She also told them that she had lived with Wade for 2 months before he was arrested and imprisoned for nearly 4 months. The number that Wade had used to call Melissa belonged to a woman named Christine Melton, and Melissa said she had never heard of the name. Officers went to the home the number was traced to in an attempt to arrest Wade for domestic violence, and they were met with a disturbing and horrifying scene. They discovered that officers from another jurisdiction were already present at Melton's house. The officers who had been dispatched because of Melissa were soon informed that Christine Melton was murdered in her house. She had been strangled to death while she was asleep. 35-year-old Christine Melton was described as a woman who loved with all her soul and was a fierce protector. She was a waitress, and Cape Coral launched a homicide investigation into her death. Her car was missing, and it was described as a black Nissan Versa. It didn't take long for the connection to be made, and Wade became a suspect in Christine's murder. The officer who had come to Melissa's rescue was also the one who had gone to confirm that the driver a witness had spotted in the restaurant parking lot was indeed Wade Wilson. Even though the officer attempted to stall him until he called for backup, Wade escaped and drove more than 6 miles to Hancock to a man named Josh to ask him for money for a bus ticket to leave town. He also told Josh he had killed people, so an unsettled Josh called the police. However, they were unable to arrest Wade as he escaped again. Barely a few hours later, the Cape Coral police received another distressing call. They were told that a 43-year-old mother of 2, Diane Ruiz, had been missing. She was a mother of 2 and had been working at a bar where she was reported to have never missed a shift in 5 years. This was why the police were called. She was reported missing around 4 p.m. on the same day when she didn't show up for her shift in the morning. Diane's purse was eventually found along a roadway, but she was nowhere to be found. The only evidence that Diane was on her way to work was her purse and a black Nissan Versa traveling along the road between the hours of 10 and 11 a.m. Later that day, at night, a headway was finally made into all 3 cases that were beginning to look similar. Since the alert was put out for Wade after he beat Melissa, a detective was able to contact Wade's biological father, Stephen Testaseka. He told Stephen to let him know if Wade tried to contact him, and later that night, Wade called his father.
Did he end up calling you later that evening?
Yes, ma'am.
And what did he tell you in that call that evening?
He just told me, he did something. There was 2 people gone that would not be back. He said, I'm a killer.
Stephen recounted how Wade told him that he had strangled Melton and had wrapped her body up. He could not fit her body in the trunk of her car and left her before driving up the road, where he lured Diane Ruiz into the car after asking her for directions.
He said he saw her walking down the street and stopped and asked her for directions.
With visible discomfort, Stephen described how Wade murdered Diane Ruiz. Wade had asked her for directions to a school nearby, imploring her to take him there when Ruiz decided to enter the car. After Diane got into the car, Wade attempted to strangle her, and this led to a struggle. Unfortunately, Wade strangled her and beat her, and as Diane struggled to run away from the car, Wade ran her over. He got out and noticed that Diane was still alive before entering the car and running Diane over more than 20 times. He then called Stephen and told him that he intentionally ran Diane over that many times because he wanted her to look like spaghetti. Stephen admitted that he didn't want to call the police, but because of how excited Wade sounded, he realized that Wade wasn't remorseful and called the police. Due to the information that Stephen gave the police, they were eventually able to track Wade down. He had broken into the home of a married couple who were fortunately not home because they had traveled to Ohio that morning. Several agency officers were deployed to the scene, and after 30 minutes of peaceful negotiation and verbal commands, Wade came out and was arrested. He was then transported to the Cape Coral Department for booking before he was sent to the Lee County Jail. On October 15th, a report was released and the content revealed that Wade had called Melissa from the Lee County Jail and confessed to murdering Christine and Diane. Ruiz's body was found 3 days later in a field with vultures circling over it. Melissa told the news outlet saying, "He admitted over the phone to me that he murdered both these women. He strangled both of them. He said he just felt like it. He said he was on substances and it messed him up." Melissa had previously told the police that if Wade had succeeded in dragging her into the car after he beat her up outside the spa where she went to meet him, she wasn't sure she would still be alive. As it turns out, she was right. 6 weeks after these brutal murders, Wade Wilson was indicted for these murders. He was charged with 2 counts of first-degree premeditated murder, 1 count each of battery, grand theft of a motor vehicle, burglary of a dwelling, and petty theft. The day after he was indicted, the first court appearance for Wade happened via remote video, and he attended this hearing from jail. After he was arrested, he was held without bail, and the judge who presided over his first hearing refused him bond. As a result, all of his hearings happened from jail. Wade's trial extended beyond normal time because of multiple trial motions. In September 2020, Wade and his cellmate attempted to escape the Lee County Jail. It was revealed in court that the 2 men allegedly belonged to a white supremacist gang and were going to escape around 1 a.m. The police officers were tipped off, and upon investigation, it was shown that their cell window was already tampered with. Despite this, it still took more than 3 years before Wade Wilson was made to appear in front of a jury. Due to the length of time he had spent in prison before sentencing, Wade underwent numerous transformations, and the most notable one was his addition of many facial tattoos. Many of these tattoos were Nazi symbols, which many said showed no sign of remorse or repentance. One of the more alarming tattoos was seen on the side of his head. He had a swastika, a symbol that is associated with Nazi Adolf Hitler, inked on his head. Because of this drastic change, the defense requested that the court allow facial makeup and street clothing to cover these tattoos because there was the probability that this sort of appearance would prejudice the jury. Even though the court allowed this, Wade Wilson refused to use makeup to cover up these tattoos and decided to appear in court that way. By June 2024, the delays happening in Wade's trial were no longer tolerated, and Wade appeared in court without covering his tattoos in a suit. On June 10th, 2024, a 12-person jury was seated, and it was finally time to try Wade Wilson for the murders of Christine Melton and Diane Ruiz. Opening statements were taken, and multiple witnesses were called to the stand. Many people admitted that Wade had confessed to the murders, and the defense, faced with unwavering evidence, didn't dispute it. Rather, they produced an insanity plea and said that he's just whacked out of his mind when referring to Wade Wilson. This wasn't approved, and after 2 long hours of deliberations and closed-door examinations, the jury reached a verdict on the charges that Wade faced.
8 or more jurors vote for the death penalty, your recommendation must be for the death penalty.
5 years after the gruesome murders of these 2 women, the jury found Wade Wilson guilty on all counts. 10 out of the 12 jury members agreed on the maximum capital punishment, which is the death penalty for Wade. Throughout the trial and reading of the verdict, Wade Wilson displayed no form of emotion except for the time he smirked at the judge. It was obvious that he felt no remorse for his actions. If he was scared that he could be facing the death penalty, he never showed it. The victims of the families were said to have wept and showed visible signs of relief when they learned that Wade Wilson was finally going to be punished for his actions. Wade, now 30 years old, will be sentenced on July 23, 2024, by Judge Nicholas Thompson, who will decide whether to go with the jury's verdict and give him the death penalty or not. If the death sentence is confirmed, Wade will be transferred to Florida's death row at Union Correctional Institution. One man's actions tragically changed the life of many, and in the case of Wade Wilson, he made his biological father face great emotional conflict, as he considered whether to tell the police that the child he had in his early teens was a murderer and a psychopath. Now let's watch these dangerous teens who put their parents through the same ordeal as Wade's father.